Hey, welcome back to the Average Joe Finances podcast. I'm your host, Mike Cavaggioni, and today's guest is Becky Nova. And Becky I normally don't give like intros or anything, but we were talking a little bit off camera and we were just talking about New York and pizza and stuff because it's two things that we really like, pizza and real estate. But she's the founder of Lady Landlords. So I'm really excited to have her on. Becky, thank you so much for joining me today.
Of course. Thanks for having me on.
Yeah, absolutely. Hey, first things first. Okay. So I didn't really go too much into your background or anything. So we want to know more about you. So if you could share a little bit about yourself, share your story. Who is Becky Nova?
Sure. So I am a cancer researcher by day and a real estate investor by night. I actually quit cancer research back in my 20s for a few years. I moved over to Europe. I used to own a tour company in Spain. I expanded into Portugal. I bought a bar in Portugal and I bought a bus to take people between Spain, Portugal, and back and forth. Unfortunately, though, I made a really bad business decision on buying that bar in Portugal, moved back to the United States about 10 years ago now, pretty much penniless and homeless, trying to figure out what I was going to do. But no one ever really aspires to live in their parents' basement at 30 years old. So I needed to find a way to get out. So I ended up going back to cancer research. And that was around the time that I met my now husband. Emilio is an immigrant from the Dominican Republic, really moved here with that American dream. Home ownership was such a big part of that. And that was really what had us fall into kind of being that accidental landlord to start.
Okay, my first rental property too was also an accidental landlord thing as well. While I was in the military, I had to transfer to another duty station and it was impossible to sell. This was in 2007, 2008 timeframe. It was impossible to sell. So I wound up renting it out. And that was my first experience as a landlord when I was 22 years old. But now just get away from all that. So the thing is, you met your husband, right? He came here with that American dream, right? You want to own your own home, start a family, all that good stuff, right? That typically when people think about coming to America, that's what they think about. So how did you wind up becoming an accidental landlord? Like, how did that work out?
Sure. So I wanted no part of buying a home, not even like our own personal home. To me, I just wanted to come back to the States, make money, and I was going to go live abroad again. That's all that I wanted. But as you do in relationships, you compromise. So my husband really wanted his own home. Same thing, the whole white picket fence, that whole story. So I said, okay, fine, we'll buy a home. I am not living mortgage payment to mortgage payment. We live in New York, right outside the city. At the time, we were actually living in the Bronx. Things are expensive. And I said, this is not something that I'm willing to just put all of my money into and just stay and work in this 9 to 5 grind for the rest of my life. So I always tell people I had the best idea ever that we were going to buy a multifamily, live in one and rent it out. I had no idea that this was a concept, that house hacking was an actual term. To me, I just needed a way to help offset the high cost of living in New York.
Okay, yeah, that's fair. And it's really awesome because house hacking is probably one of the best ways to start. So by doing that, just to start off, you're already putting yourself, I guess, like putting the right foot forward as starting your journey into real estate investing, which I don't think as you were starting yet at that time. Now, I want to rewind back to the whole thing in Portugal, right? Because that sounds like it was pretty detrimental. And for you to be able to bounce back from something like that, I'd like to know a little bit more. So how much money did you lose in that process? And what was it like trying to climb up back out of that debt hole that you got yourself into?
Sure. I hate sharing this part of the story because it always means that I have to admit my husband was right.
Yeah.
It's always a tough one for me. My tour company in Spain was probably one of the most successful businesses I've ever had in my life. And I've done various things, but that was absolutely fantastic. The bar that I bought in Portugal was really where I made just a horrible business decision. I got really screwed over from the guy that I bought the bar from, and I lost a little over $100,000. Yeah. And then also it ended up where I had to put so much effort to try to save the bar that I ended up losing the tour company. So that also killed off one cash cow and then really took all the rest of the money that I had. So after that it happened, like I could have actually stayed probably and would be still fighting a legal case in Portugal to see if I could have gotten my bar back now 10 years later. But what would I have been doing during that time? So instead, I cut my losses on the bar. I ended up just partying in Portugal for the rest of summer and moved home in the fall. So when I came back very much with this idea that you can do the things that you love. And then I forgot and I went out and that's exactly what I did. And I found work in places that were what I was passionate about. And then I realized that things that I was passionate about either didn't make money or definitely did not cover expenses in New York. So that's when then I ended up going back into the medical field at that time. And I started a medical consulting company. The medical consulting company was really something I was trying to get off the ground. And honestly, I was just not making money at all. And every penny that I made went back into the business. And it was really a tough time. And it was actually at a point where my husband realized I was in debt. I had a horrible credit score because I couldn't afford my bills, that he was the one that really came to me with almost an ultimatum. We were still dating at the time. And he said, hey, listen, I want to buy a house. I want to have kids. I want to build a life together. But here you're in debt and you don't have a good credit score. We can't do the things that I want to do. So he was fix this or get out. And I was like, no, this relationship's worth saving. And I knew I had the potential to go back and make money. I knew I can go back to my old career, but I was really dismayed with what I was been doing previously within cancer research. So I decided to suck it up. I found a contract that paid way too much money than they probably should have paid me for a short period of time that would have gotten me out of debt, but also given me the money for that down payment in only a few short months. So that was really a game changer for me. And it ended up putting me in the position to find a role back in cancer research where I felt more empowered to be able to help my patients. So I ended up going back to them then full time in a much better capacity 10 years after I'd quit.
Wow. What a comeback story, right? So when you wound up losing the tour business in Spain, is because you had to over leverage to try to make up for the losses of the bar? Like, how did you wind up losing that?
So part of it was because I had to sink all the money into one. My other problem was that where my tour company was in Spain versus where my bar was in Portugal was about 5 hours away. So I had apartments that I was renting in both places. And the idea was that every 3 to 4 days, I would switch cities. But because the bar was having such problems, which I'll explain in a second, I couldn't oversee my business in Spain. And unfortunately, my business was very much, as branding is these days, they are the person in front. So now all of a sudden, the people I left to manage my tour company just weren't the right personality, not the right managers to be there. So I had to decide which one of these two businesses I wanted to save. My goal is always to go live on a beach. So to me, saving my beachfront bar made more sense. Problem with my bar was that I bought the bar from the previous owner and I bought it in turnkey condition. Now, turnkey condition, meaning for a restaurant, that I have the tables, that I have the chairs, that I have the plates, I have the silverware, I have a commercial kitchen. And when I bought the place, the seller took out all of those items, emptied it. He took out my commercial stove and just put in a little dinky 4-burner that you would find in your home. I can't run my restaurant that way. And also one of the other parts of the agreement was that he was going to help transport the kegs, the food, everything that was needed, especially since I was going to be back and forth between the two cities. And that was something he completely cut me off from that. Where this bar was, since you were from the East Coast, think Jersey Shore. You have 3-4 months to make your money in summer and that's it. So I couldn't sit there and fight with him, or I just needed to act. So I went and bought new tables, new chairs, new plates. You have no idea. Like a kitchen knife, a professional kitchen knife can cost you like $100. I never knew that. So I really had to go and save these things. I had to, at the beginning, I actually had a guy in the neighborhood of this beachfront town take me on his moped to grocery stores. And we would literally do trip day in and day out with me on the back of a moped, trying to hold like cases of beer up and down these cobblestone streets to be able to get into my bar, because I just needed to figure out how to make it work the best I could.
Wow.
Then, long story short, he ended up having problems with the new bar that he bought. So he felt that the appropriate thing was to come back and steal the bar that he had sold to me. So he ended up paying off the town's attorney to claim that we did not have a fully executed contract. So then he actually had the Portuguese police turn the bar back over to him with then all my stuff.
Wow. Oh my goodness. I didn't know it was that bad. Like when you described it initially, it was like, okay, the business kind of flopped and that was that. And you wind up losing out on money. That's even worse than anything I could have possibly imagined. Wow.
And want to know why he lost his bar and had to come back and steal mine?
Sure. Yeah. I mean, does it have to do with the fact that he probably installed all of that commercial equipment that he took from the old bar and it just didn't work? I don't know. What was it?
No, because he was running drugs through his own bar and needed the bar to launder money. And his partner found out. So he had to come back and steal my bar so he had a place to wash his money.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Wow. It's an unfortunate situation. Like you definitely got dealt a extremely bad hand there. It sounds like you pretty much lost everything, but you were still able to bounce back from that, right? And build the life that you have right now, which is absolutely amazing. And I think it's important to focus on the losing aspect that you had. And it's one of the reasons why I wanted to dive a little bit deeper into that is to show that, because I know a lot of people that get down and out because they get into a deal that doesn't work out, it flops, or there's one or two things that happen in their business and they just throw up their hands like, well, this isn't for me. And they give up on being an entrepreneur. Right. So you're going to have days like that. You started off in that aspect, right? You had a really great business and then you had one that destroyed both of them. So right off the bat, someone else in your shoes would probably just throw their hands up and be like, nope, I'm just going to go back to doing my 9 to 5, doing the cancer research that you were doing. And that's going to be that. But no, you said, I'm going to go back into that to recover, but I still want to get into something else. And that's when you figured out real estate was something that you were interested in by accident, but a happy accident, right?
I came back. Everybody, when I came back, were like, oh my God, you must be so upset. That was so horrible. What happened? You lost all this money. You lost this life that you had built. You lost your business. And I was just like, was I sad? Am I upset? Yeah. But okay, it happened. I learned so much from that experience that has now helped me. But honestly, there are still things that now I feel like I do in my real estate investing journey or within my business with Lady Landlords that I actually learned from making all of those mistakes. And honestly, I think that was better education than I could have gotten from any MBA.
Yeah, 100%. I mean, that's one of the things I wanted to point out too, is in real estate or in business in general, when you have these things happen, don't look at it as a failure or anything like that. Look at it as an expensive education. Right. You just paid for your degree. You
it's still
learned
cheaper
all
than an
that.
MBA.
It is, right? But you got to learn all of this and get the scars to prove that you were there. And at the same time, come out on top that you know what not to do in the future. Definitely something to think about as you're doing this. Now, okay, so you started off, you got the house hacking thing going, right? What was the very next step after that? Because I know you were apprehensive to even buy that property. And you said, if I'm going to do it, this is how we're going to do it. How did the next deal go? What made you decide to say, I'm going to go ahead and start buying real estate?
Sure. It was actually at the closing for that first property. We were at the closing, and honestly, Mike, the closing was horrible. There were so many problems with our paperwork. The closing took over 4 hours and probably had more curse words thrown out than any other closing in like the history of closings. It was an absolute disaster.
Oh, it's also Newark. There's a lot of F-bombs in New York.
Right. So at the end of this closing, that was absolutely miserable. I get a check from the tenants living in my property on day one. I just signed over my life. I just signed the biggest check I've ever written in my life. And yet I'm getting money back on day one. I loved this. And that was right then and there. I actually said at that closing, I was like, oh, I'm so doing this again. My husband, my realtor, and my mortgage broker looked at me and were like, are you nuts? And I was like, no, I'm going to figure out a way to do this again. So we closed. That's when I went on this absolute like rampage of just understanding everything about real estate. I started plugging into all the podcasts. I was reading books about real estate. I was talking to anybody that I could about it. I really went on this that's when I learned actually what house hacking was. It was then that I learned about this concept that now I was already employing. And I kept calling my realtor and my mortgage broker like every couple of weeks, at least once a month. I was like, hey, can I buy another house now? Hey, can I buy another house now? And they kept being like, no, you can't. Like, it's going to take you years to buy another house. I'm like, no, I'm going to figure out how to do this. It was from staying in touch with those people that then presented the next opportunity. Now, my husband still thinks I'm nuts. I just wanted to buy a home for us. What the hell are you making me do? So he's like dragging his feet in this. But one of those times that I called my realtor and I said, hey, I'm ready to buy another house. Can I buy another house now? He said, actually, I think I might have something you'd want to buy, but I need you to call your mortgage broker and see if you can get approved for it. And if so, we can move forward. I called my mortgage broker like I did every month. And I said, hey, can I buy another house yet? And he said, I don't know. Let's look at the numbers. Let's see if we can make it work. He goes, you know what, actually, I think you're in a place where we can actually make this deal work. In the meantime, my husband walks inside the house and he goes, hey, it's so weird. I just saw a realtor across the street coming out of our neighbor's house. I wonder why that is. And I was like, he has a listing for our neighbor's property. That's what it is. And that was exactly what happened. He met this little old lady in the neighborhood when he was actually at our house for the appraisal, and they stayed in touch. And finally, this little old lady was ready to sell her house. So we ended up then buying our neighbor's fourplex with a parking lot. And for those that know New York, a parking lot is a big deal around here.
That is a premium.
Yes. I prefer that over the house, to be honest.
Yes. Okay. So let me get this straight. So the property that you bought was a duplex, right? And
Right.
you lived on one side with your husband and then rented out the other side. Already had tenants in place, right?
Tenants. Yep.
Then the one across the street was a fourplex.
Yes.
So did it already have 3 sets of tenants in place? Because the little old lady was moving out. So did you already use that with 3 tenants in place?
So little old lady and her husband who'd owned the place for 30 years. First off, they were hoarders. They had stuff everywhere. They also didn't really understand pricing for the units. So their pricing of what they had these 3 other couples, these 3 other families in the other units was just crazy. So we actually made an agreement we told the tenants, these are the prices that they're going to be if you want to stay. So we gave them the option to actually move out of the property before the closing if they did not accept the new prices, or then they were to accept what those new rents were going to be. 1 tenant chose to stay, 2 chose to leave, and then the 4th unit was the sellers who then needed to stay in the property for about 3 months after the closing because they were moving all of their precious items to land somewhere else. And they were an 80-year-old couple that, of course, needed to save money and move all those items themselves.
Okay, that's fair. Now, did you work that into the agreement that they got to stay there for those 3 months for free, or were they paying rent during that time?
No, so they did stay for free, which was part of the agreement, but there was one money put in escrow, and there was clearly a fine if they stayed past that date.
Okay.
It also was because we needed them to finish some of the work on this removal of all of these items was really one of the reasons that they also needed to stay. And then since when we actually looked at the house, we couldn't even see a lot of things. There was a whole room I didn't even know existed because we couldn't see it because it was just covered with so many things. So they also agreed to be able to fix some of the things. Like they repainted everything when they moved out, but they needed to clearly get everything out to be in that condition.
Yeah, it sounds like a TLC episode right there of hoarders.
Yeah, I was just saying, maybe a little bit more of that hoarders show. They could have definitely been on that. It was insane.
When that happened, so you had the 1 tenant that stayed in place, the other 2 moved out. Did you renovate those 2 units or anything, or did you keep them as is and then look for new tenants, or did you just fix it up a little bit, new paint, change out the carpets or anything?
Sure. Remember that I live across the street in a duplex. Tenants that I had upstairs were these 2 young bartenders. And when I met them, I'm like, oh, these 2 are going to fall in love. These 2 are so right for each other. They didn't see it. They did not get along. They hated each other after their year lease, but they wanted to stay with us. So what ended up happening was we had the tenant from upstairs move across the street. He wanted his own space, but he can't afford the area. So we made an agreement with him. Hey, we'll rent you this apartment, but it's outdated. It's not renovated. We'll give it to you for a cheaper price so that way you can afford it, but we're not making any upgrades. So he took it. So we just literally had him move across the street, which was fantastic. Then the top unit that the tenants moved out, we did a gut renovation on that one because that was just, we could not re-rent that. It was just, there was a family that had lived there for 16 years.
Oh, wow.
Moved in as a couple. They ended up with 3 kids. There seemed to be a little bit of a miscommunication between the sellers and them on why they ended up choosing to leave, but that was the choice that they made. And then the seller's apartment, when they finally moved out 3 months after, we thought that we were going to have to make upgrades to it. But we were like, you know what? Screw it. We're just going to throw it on the market. We can't do work till next week. We'll see what happens. And we rented it in under 12 hours.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow. Okay, so now at that point, you have 3 out of the 4 units rented because you're renovating one of them. Then you have your upstairs unit and your duplex rented out. So did one of the bartenders stayed there, right? The other one moved across the street. So now you're pretty much 4 for 5 at this point.
We're
rented
4 for
out.
5. The 6th apartment we renovated while we were actually on our honeymoon on the other side of the world.
Wow.
So we had our contractors sending us things. Then when we got back, we finished some of the other items up ourselves. And then we got that rented. We got that rented out as well.
Okay. Selfish question for me, because I'm 5,000 miles away from some of the properties that I have. How do you manage not only the tenants while you're traveling around and everything like that, but also managing the contracting and all that other stuff that was going on when you were renovating those units, because that's a lot to have going on while you go out on your honeymoon. So how did that kind of work out?
Sure. And also, my husband and I live in the Dominican Republic during the winters. And that was my dream. Remember that whole compromise thing? He wanted his home. I want my beach home.
There you go.
So I knew from the very beginning of all of this that I needed to put systems into place so that way I can manage my properties from anywhere. I didn't care that my properties were across the street. I was going to treat, or that I lived in one of them. I treated even that first apartment that's above my head. I treated that as if I was Becky Nova, property manager for like 1,000 units. Like I put systems in place. I had my own email for it. I had a Google Voice number. Like I put things like in order. So same thing with the contractor. Once we had that contractor, my favorite thing ever is using Home Depot, where I have a pro account. So then I can have my contractors go pick out the items that are needed, or I can actually put the items that I want. So I can pick out what color paint I want, what color backsplash I want, what type of countertop I want, put it all in a cart. My contractor goes, just picks it all up, signs, goes to check out. I get a text message that says, hey, do you allow this person to make this purchase? I click, yes, I do. And I could do that from the beach. And then what I was doing during that time was I was using FaceTime to be able to check in on the work. So then that way I can see, I will never forget this. We were in the Maldives on our honeymoon, and one of those like really like romantic little like over the water hut type things.
Oh,
and
nice.
Our contractor was calling us, and it was probably like midnight in the Maldives. And he was calling us, FaceTiming us, showing us that he'd installed the toilet. We're like, thank you for interrupting our romantic over the water hut here on our honeymoon to show us that you put in a toilet. It was such like a weird thing to do, but that was actually how we got a lot of updates.
After that, you just light a candle. Right now, everything's right. No, that's awesome. That's awesome. Yeah. So you put systems in place as if you were like managing apartment units, right? Like you have this huge undertaking. And I think that's really important, that even with just having the 5 units besides the 6th one that you lived in, right? But having those systems in place so that no matter where you went, it was going to work. So you could take those trips in the wintertime to a DR, right? And live out there for a couple months and not really have to worry about what's happening back in New York, because you know that if something was to come up, the right people are in place to take care of it. Yeah, I think that's huge.
The other thing too is having like a boots on the ground. So it was really here in New York, it's a little bit easier because it's very typical to have broker's fees. So my realtor, who's actually become like a very good friend to me, I've also bought 4 more multifamilies from him in the past 3 years. So I would probably like me too. But he's really somebody that I can count on and be able to call and say, hey, can you go check up on this? Hey, can you go see what's working here? We have that. And we also have a handyman that we can call for really anything. And he's been great for opening a door for a contractor, opening a door for a plumber when there's an emergency. So it's really great just to be able to have those couple people on hand that you can really count on. And I have no problem paying people for time. So cool. I need my handyman to go open a door. I'll send you money. Right? Let's Zelle you, let's Venmo you with Cash App, whatever you want. Like I'll send you money if that's the service that you're really going to be able to provide for me.
Yeah, that's fantastic. I think the other key thing here is the relationships that you built, right? It's not just people aren't getting that phone call from you saying, it's Becky. They're getting that phone call saying, oh, it's Becky. What does she need? Because you built that rapport and you built that relationship. So I think that is huge. One of the biggest things I talk about on this podcast too is like that networking piece, but more importantly than networking is the relationship building piece. Right. You can network all day and get to meet all the people you want to meet, but if you don't actually sit down and take the time to get to know them and build that relationship, they're just gonna be like, oh, yeah, I know that guy, whatever. So yeah, I think that's definitely important.
One of the best things that I've done also within that networking and building those relationships that I just want to share as a tip that's really helped me is I refer them all the time. So now, once again, I'm not doing a gut rehab every other day. I'm not a flipper. I do buy and holds. So I don't need somebody to come in and do a gut rehab all the time. But when I need somebody to come do a gut rehab, I want a phone call back. I want to be prioritized. So what I've learned to do is refer people as often as I can and share resources that are great. So then that way, when I do call, I go to the top of the line. Here in New York last summer, we actually had a hurricane. It was going to have a ton of rain, a ton of winds. Already where I live is a place that is more likely to flood than some other areas. I actually had our roofer call us and say, hey, just so you know, I'm going to come stop by tomorrow morning at 9:00. I just want to check on the house. Just know that you're on the schedule. We don't know if you're going to have any damage or not, but I just want you to know that you're on the schedule because in case you do, Becky and Emilio, we're going to make sure to take care of you guys first. That was amazing. I
Yeah.
didn't even have to call and worry about that. And luckily, we didn't have any damage from it. So I called him and said, hey, don't worry, come by. We're okay. Don't make the trip down here. But he did that because I had referred him so much business over the years that he found value in that relationship and was willing to do that for me.
Yeah, that's the key word you just said right there, value. Bring somebody value and they will never forget you.
Correct.
That's huge. Absolutely. I want to touch on a little bit on Lady Landlords. So if you can share a little bit about what is Lady and how do you help empower women in investing?
Sure. Some of us might remember March 2020. A lot of people all of a sudden got sent home, trapped in their houses, those types of things. My husband was one of those. He ended up losing his job. They closed down during that time. He comes home. I was like, hey, babe, I lost my job. What are we going to do? We lost an income stream. And my response was, oh my God, we have to buy another house. And he was like, no, like I lost my job. What do you mean we're going to buy another house? And I was like, listen, we can't count on other people to provide us with income. We need to create that ourselves. And this is a better example of that than anything else. We need to buy another rental property. He thinks I'm nuts. Again, he runs off, slams the door in one of the other rooms. And I was like, fine, you know what? I'm like, I'm sure there's other people out there that think like me that realize that this is something that we have to really put our best foot forward on. So I said, you know what? I'm going to go make some friends with some strangers on the internet. I started Lady Landlords as a Facebook group. Honestly, Mike, I thought it'd be me and my mommy hanging out there. But all of a sudden I got member requests and we just really grew as a group. We now have over 30,000 members that have joined Lady Landlords in the past 2 years. And when people joined, all these women were sitting there looking for resources. And I felt like we became a great landing place to come and ask some questions. Hey, I don't know what to do about this. I don't know what to do about this. How do you handle this? How do you grow? How do I manage this tenant situation? And I kept answering a lot of the same things over and over again. And I said, listen, if I hear the same question twice, I know other people are thinking about this. So let's figure out a way to really be able to disseminate that information in a better way. So from that, I was able to put together a course on how to get started, on how to manage your tenants, on how to grow your portfolio. We do workshops, we do networking events, we have a podcast too. And it's just really become a go-to resource for women to get the confidence that they need to go out and play in this man's world of real estate investing.
100%. I love that because remember the first real estate meetup I went to, I think out of like the 30 something people that were there was 2 women. Right. And I go to real estate meetups now and you start seeing more and more women, which I think is fantastic because it always seemed like it was the quote unquote man's sport, right? When you were going to real estate meetups, if you were a woman, you were like feeling out of place. Right. And to see that kind of growth, and I think a lot of that impact is from things that you've done as well with starting this group. It's built that interest, right? Because it's important to have something else. Right. Besides just your own job, or even if you're a homemaker, right? This is still something you can get yourself into, learn about, and start creating other streams of income, right? And be more independent. And I think that's huge. And, I like the fact that I'm seeing more and more women at these meetups and at conferences because it's just giving a more diverse background to real estate investors. And it brings in that, I guess, it doesn't change the dynamic at all. But it allows you to expand your network to just so many more places. So I think what you've done is absolutely amazing. First off, I want to say thank you for what you've built, especially from the ground up. Just creating a Facebook page called Lady Landlords, right? I'm pretty sure that it wasn't hard for people to find when they said, I want to go learn about real estate, and they do a little search. That's one of the first things that's going to pop up. So you created a community to have people feel more comfortable, to have women in particular feel more comfortable about real estate investing. And that's awesome. So I wanted to point that out. I think it's absolutely amazing what you've done.
Thank you.
Your story is amazing. The bounce back that you've had, how you got into real estate by accident and then said, hey, this is nuts, but I want to keep doing it. You went with the flow of, I think this is crazy, but I like crazy. So let's stay crazy. Your husband might still think you're crazy, and that's okay. You're creating all these different streams of income, and you did exactly what you said you wanted to do when he lost his job, right? You said, we lost a stream of income. We need to replace it with a stream of income. And that's what you were doing. I think it's super important to have multiple streams of income so you could set yourself up when you reach that financial independence number, it's life-changing. And you're only going to get there by getting multiple streams of income, whether it's in real estate, the stock market, whatever you want to invest in businesses. I prefer real estate. I know you prefer real estate as well. It's just a great way to build wealth and build cash flow. All right, Becky, this has been absolutely fantastic. I want to transition this into something that we call the final round. I'm going to ask you three hard-hitting questions and then one opinionated question, so people already know how you are when you're in a very tough situation, but this will provide maybe a little bit more transparency for people. So if you're ready to go, we'll get this party started.
All right.
All right, let's do it. The first question, Becky, is what's the biggest mistake you've ever made in real estate investing?
I'm going to take a little cop out on this one and say none.
Ooh.
I feel that
This is a first here. All right.
I still believe that the first property that we had a ton of issues. It was also only a duplex. It was the right property for us to start with. We got our feet wet with one tenant. Things weren't necessarily right. We ended up having a ton of leaks and other issues with the property. We had a legal battle, oddly enough, with my own attorney that I won. It gave us the foundation that we needed to then go to the second one. Second one, same thing. We made mistakes, but I learned from all of those. And they taught me how to do that better than the third deal and the fourth deal. So to me, I don't really think that they were a mistake. They were put in my path to teach me something.
I love it. I love it. Again, like you said before, it's education, right? Each one of those experiences educated you to make you better for that next deal.
And every time when my husband and I go look at like a property, we'll talk about something and be like, oh, but I don't know about this. And we're like, we didn't think about that 3 years ago. We didn't even know that was a thing. So now all of a sudden, it's just interesting to see how we've been able to elevate what we look for and really refine our process. But we had to go through that to get to where we are now.
Yeah, it helps shelter you from some of the things that you might run into if you were to buy that property, because it was things you weren't thinking about in the past. Like you said, if the house was built in the 60s or 70s, right? What's the plumbing look like? What kind of wiring is the electricity in there? Or do we have to rewire the whole house? Do we have to replace the plumbing? Those are questions that when you did your first deal, you probably weren't asking that.
No.
So
I was just like, ooh, I like the paint color. We did not ask the right questions at all for the first property. And we turned out okay. We got involved. We got that first property, which honestly was the most important part.
Absolutely. All right, Becky. So the next question it ties into that last one too. But what is something that you've learned, which you've learned a lot, that you wish you knew when you first started?
Sooner to get involved, the better, which I feel like is probably an answer you've heard before. I feel like real estate investors always say that they wish they had gotten started sooner. Yep. And I think I'm going to fall into that category. I wish that I had understood the power of real estate back then, earlier on in my 20s. One, because I think as we learned, prices are really only going up. But so I think getting into the game sooner than later just makes more sense. And I wish I had understood that I could have taken and built a real estate portfolio sooner that then would have paid for my European adventures, where then I had a safety net that when I went and bought a business and it didn't turn out right, cool, I still have my rental income coming in every month. I can lose that money and I still had a safety net. And I wish I had built things backwards that way.
Yeah, that is a very common answer for that question. And I think it's important that's a common answer, right? Because a lot of people, they'll say that I wish I would have started sooner. I wish I would have started when I was younger. Those are the typical things you hear. And I think it's important for people to hear that, especially some of my younger listeners that are listening to this right now. Becky's part of that club too. We all wish we started this when we were younger. Right. So if you're in your 20s, get started now. Don't wait until you're in your 30s, because if you start in your 20s, you could be retired in your 30s and just living and enjoying life. So I think that's huge. So I appreciate the transparency.
And it's never going to be perfect. Every deal is not going to be exactly right and the perfect deal, and you're not going to get a home run every single time. But the more important part is to get involved and do it sooner than later.
Yeah, 100%, 100%. Awesome. So, hey, speaking of home runs, how about them Yankees? How about Aaron Judge? Anyway.
Reference to that too. Even Aaron Judge, it took him a while to get 61.
Yep. And he's still got, 7 more games to try to break the records.
Get another.
Yeah. All right, here we go. So the third question, Becky, is do you have any tips or tricks that you would recommend to someone that is just getting started today?
Yes. I've alluded to this earlier on in our talk here, but systemize from the beginning. Go into that. Even if you don't have a plan to build an empire or build beyond 2, 3, 4 units, treat even one unit as a business. You need to have things organized. You have things systemized. You can't be in a place of just running around like a chicken with your head cut off because, oh, you need a lease, or, oh, you need to post an ad for your listing. You need to come up with what qualifications a tenant needs to have. You need to have those things structured and systemized. Start from the beginning. It'll make your life so much easier, especially if you plan on growing.
100%. Love that answer. Having those systems in place can make or break anything that you do in life. And I really like how you point out that even if it's just one property, even if it's just one door, have that system in place, make it look like you know what you're doing, right? Your tenants will never know the difference. That's awesome. Okay. Final question of the final round. And I will preface this with, besides your own, do you have a favorite business, investing, or real estate related book or podcast, or both?
My favorite, I don't know if it really falls under like investing more than like kind of entrepreneurship and self-help, if you will. But my favorite book that I always recommend to people is Start With Why by Simon Sinek. There's also probably, I think it's still considered like one of the most popular TED Talks ever, but the book itself is amazing. Start With Why really gets involved in what is the motivation behind the things that we do. Mike, as you alluded to, some days as an entrepreneur are fantastic. We feel like everything's going great. 2 hours later, the entire world crashes. Then all of a sudden things are fantastic again. Then all of a sudden the world crashes again, right? We need to understand what our motivations are of why these things are important to us. When I had that first closing that was absolutely horrible, and it was such a disaster, I needed to have that anchor and that grounding of why this was so important to me. My husband understood that was that American dream. Homeownership was so important to him. My goal, I want to go live on a beach. So it was something that we needed to be able to ground ourselves and say, why are we putting in this energy? Why can't I just work at a 9-to-5 job, buy my single family home, live there until I'm retired and die? What made me have to do something that was going to be different? And that's really what Start With Why helps people get to, is an understanding of what's your anchor and your motivation that will help carry you through when things just get tough.
Yeah, absolutely love that. Great book recommendation. So I definitely appreciate that. Now, I know you do have a podcast as well, so that's going to go into this last question here. But first of all, I just want to say, Becky, this interview has been absolutely amazing. I love your story. I love what you're doing. So now for my listeners, I want to be able to share with them where they can find more information about you. So do you have a website you can share with us, social media, and of course, where can we listen to your podcast?
Sure. So easiest place for those that identify as female is they can come find us in the Facebook group, Lady Landlords. Nice and simple to find us there. You can also find our website at lady-landlords.com, which has a link to our podcast. And you can literally listen to our podcast wherever you listen to podcasts or on YouTube. And lastly, for all genders, you can find me on Instagram at Becky Nova 24.
All right, fantastic. So I'll make sure I have all those links in the show notes to make it easy for the listeners. So you can just click or copy and paste away. Just again, don't do it while you're driving. Becky, this has been fantastic. Thank you so much for taking the time to have this conversation with me today and share your story with our listeners.
Of course. Thank you so much for the opportunity. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, absolutely. And hey, to my listeners, thank you so much for joining me and our special guest, Becky Nova, on the Average Joe Finances podcast. Go leave us a 5-star review and tell us what you liked about today's episode with Becky. Aloha from Hawaii, and have a fantastic rest of your day.